The Note in the Mailbox. Chapter 1. The Promise. Margaret Thornton pressed her face against the airplane window, watching the city lights spread beneath her like scattered diamonds. 37,000 feet below, her son David was probably putting his children to bed, maybe telling them about Grandma's visit tomorrow. Her heart swelled at the thought. "See you at Christmas, Mom." His voice echoed in her memory from their phone call 3 weeks ago. The excitement in his tone had been unmistakable. "The kids can't wait to see you. Emma's been practicing a song on the piano, and little Jake has been asking when Grandma's coming every single day." She'd booked the flight that same afternoon. At 73, Margaret wasn't one for spontaneous travel anymore. The arthritis in her knees made long flights uncomfortable, and the confusion of modern airports exhausted her. But for David, for her grandchildren, she would have flown to the moon. She'd raised him alone after his father died when David was 12, working double shifts at the hospital to keep him in good schools, to give him every opportunity she never had. The flight attendant's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Denver." Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her best dress, the navy blue one with tiny pearl buttons that David had complimented years ago. She'd packed carefully, presents for the children, David's favorite chocolate chip cookies wrapped in the same red tin she'd used since he was small, and a photo album filled with pictures from his childhood that she thought he might like to show his own children. She hadn't seen them in 2 years. 2 years since that brief, awkward visit when David seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone, and Claire had been politely distant. But this time would be different. This time he wanted her there. This time he wanted her to be there. The plane touched down with a gentle bump, and Margaret felt her heart skip. Soon she would hold her grandchildren again, see how much they'd grown. Soon she would sit around David's table, part of a family Christmas for the first time in years. Chapter 2. The Journey Home. The taxi ride to David's house took 43 minutes through residential neighborhoods decorated with twinkling lights and inflatable lawn ornaments. Margaret watched families through lit windows, children playing, parents laughing, the warm glow of togetherness that she'd missed so desperately. She'd spent the last 2 Christmases alone in her small apartment, microwaving a frozen dinner and watching old movies. Her sister lived 3 states away with her own family troubles, and her few remaining friends were scattered to retirement homes or had passed away. The silence of those holidays had been deafening, but she'd told herself it was fine. She was fine. But this year, David had called. This year, she mattered again. The taxi pulled into a driveway lined with luminaria, paper bags filled with sand and candles that cast a soft, welcoming glow. David's house was beautiful, a 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch and Christmas lights outlining every edge. She could see the tree through the front window, magnificent and full, with presents already gathered beneath it. Home. This could be home again. She paid the driver, gathered her suitcase, and carefully wrapped gifts, and walked up the path she'd imagined 1,000 times during the long flight. Her reflection wavered in the glass of the front door as she raised her hand to knock. The sound echoed inside, followed by the thunder of small feet on hardwood floors. "Daddy! Someone at the door." "I'll get it, Emma. You go back to the kitchen with Mommy." Her breath caught. David's voice. Her son's voice. She straightened her shoulders and smiled, preparing for the moment when the door would swing open and his face would light up with recognition and joy. The porch light clicked on. She heard the deadbolt turn. The door opened 6 inches, held by a security chain. David's eye appeared in the gap, and she saw something she'd never seen there before, something that made her stomach drop and her hands go cold. Recognition without welcome. Knowledge without joy. "David?" Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. "Sweetheart, it's me. It's Mom." Chapter 3. The Stranger. "Mom?" The word came out flat, almost mechanical. "What are you doing here?" The question hit her like a physical blow. "What do you mean? You invited me. For Christmas. You said to come for Christmas." A long pause. Behind David, she could hear Claire's voice, sharp and urgent. "Who is it?" "It's my mother," David called back, not taking his eye from the gap in the door. "What?" Claire's footsteps approached quickly. Margaret caught a glimpse of her daughter-in-law's face, beautiful, sharp-featured, wearing the expression one might wear when finding an unwelcome insect on the porch. "David, please," Margaret said, her voice beginning to shake. "Can I come in? It's cold out here and I've traveled so far." "Mom, I don't understand. When did we say you should come?" The words swirled around her, making no sense. 3 weeks ago. You called me 3 weeks ago and said, "See you at Christmas, Mom." You said the children were excited, that Emma was practicing a song. Oh, God. David's voice dropped to a whisper. "That wasn't... Mom, that was just a thing people say. See you later, or talk to you soon. It doesn't mean literally." The porch seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "But you said Emma was practicing." "I was just telling you what she was doing. Making conversation." Behind him, Claire whispered something urgent. Margaret caught the words, "dinner party," and "important," and "can't." David's shoulders sagged. "Mom, tonight isn't good. We have people coming over, Claire's boss and his wife. It's important for my career. We can't have... it's not a good time for unexpected visitors." Unexpected visitors. The phrase cut through her like a blade. "I'm not a visitor, David. I'm your mother." "I know, but..." He glanced back at Claire, who was shaking her head vigorously. "Look, my wife doesn't want to see strangers for dinner. This is a work thing, professional. You understand. Strangers." The word hung in the December air like a physical thing, heavy and sharp, and impossible to take back. Margaret stood there, holding her suitcase and her carefully wrapped presents, trying to process what her son had just said. She was a stranger. In the eyes of the woman he'd married, in the context of the life he'd built, she was a stranger. Someone unwelcome. Someone whose presence would be an embarrassment, an inconvenience, a thing to be managed and contained. "David," she said quietly, "I'm 73 years old. I flew here because I thought you wanted me to come. I thought you missed me." His face appeared in the gap again, and she saw something that hurt worse than anger or annoyance. She saw pity. The look an adult gives to a confused child. "Mom, you can't just show up places. It doesn't work that way anymore. You need to call ahead, make plans, check with people first." Behind him, Claire was speaking in low, urgent tones about timing and appropriateness and how this was going to ruin everything. Margaret looked at her son, this man she had raised, had sacrificed for, had loved more than her own life, and saw a stranger looking back at her. Someone who spoke the language of professional obligations and appropriate notice and checking with people first. Someone who saw his own mother as a disruption to be managed. "I see," she said softly. "Maybe you could call tomorrow. We could meet for coffee or something after the holidays." After the holidays. After Christmas. The Christmas she had thought they would share. Margaret nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. "I see now."
Relief flickered across David's face. "Good, that's probably better anyway. Give us time to prepare, you know. The kids have been busy with school activities, and Claire's been planning this dinner for weeks. The children, Emma and Jake, who she had imagined running to greet her, whose hugs she had been anticipating for 3 weeks. They were somewhere in that warm, bright house, and they wouldn't even know she had been here. "Of course," said Margaret. "I wouldn't want to disrupt anything important." David didn't catch the quiet irony in her voice. "Thanks, Mom. I knew you'd understand. You've always been reasonable about these things." Had she always been reasonable? Or had she simply always bent herself into shapes that made other people comfortable? "Well," she said, adjusting her grip on her suitcase, "I should let you get back to your guests then. They're not here yet, but Claire needs to finish preparations and..." "David?" Something in her voice made him stop.
I understand perfectly. Go take care of your important dinner. Take care of your wife. Take care of your career." She turned away from the door, her back straight despite the weight of her suitcase and the greater weight of understanding. "Mom, wait, where are you going?" She paused at the edge of the porch, not turning around. "To find somewhere that doesn't consider me a stranger." The door closed behind her with a soft click, followed by the sound of the chain lock sliding back into place. Chapter 4. The Note. Margaret stood in the driveway for a long moment, listening to the sounds of preparation filtering through the windows of David's house. Voices discussing seating arrangements and wine selections, normal sounds of a normal family preparing for a normal evening with people who mattered. She was not people who mattered. The taxi was long gone, and she had no way to get to a hotel. Her phone showed 3% battery. She'd forgotten to charge it during the flight, too excited about seeing David to think about practical things. But that was fine. She wasn't ready to leave yet. There was something she needed to do first. She walked slowly to David's mailbox, a neat black column beside the driveway with "The Morrison Family" written in elegant script. Morrison. He had changed his last name when he married Claire, taking hers because it sounded more prestigious, more professional. Thornton, apparently, was not the kind of name that opened doors in his world. Margaret set down her suitcase and reached into her purse, pulling out a pen and the small notepad she always carried. Her hands were steady now, steadier than they had been in days. There was something clarifying about finally understanding where you stood in the world. She wrote carefully, her handwriting still neat despite her age. "My dearest David, I came here tonight thinking I was coming home. I realize now that I no longer have a home with you, and that's all right. People grow up. They build their own families. They make their own choices about what matters. But I want you to remember something, since it seems you may have forgotten. I used to be the person who knew when you were practicing for your school play, who knew when you were scared about a test, who knew the difference between your regular cough and the one that meant you were getting sick. I was the one who worked 16-hour shifts to pay for your college. I was the one who sat up with you when you had nightmares after your father died. I was the one who taught you to drive, to shave, to treat people with kindness and respect. I was the one who believed in you when you didn't believe in yourself. I was never a stranger, David. I was the person who loved you before you had any accomplishments to impress anyone with. I was the person who would have loved you even if you had never become successful or professional or appropriate. I still am that person, even though you no longer need her. I hope your dinner party is everything you want it to be. I hope your career flourishes and your life brings you satisfaction. I hope your children grow up knowing they are loved without conditions, without having to earn their place at the table. I won't be calling tomorrow. When you're ready to remember who I am, who I've always been, you know where to find me. With love that doesn't need an invitation, Mom. P.S. The woman who used to make you chocolate chip cookies in the red tin every Christmas is not a stranger. She's just someone you've decided not to see anymore. Margaret folded the note carefully and slipped it into the mailbox. Then she picked up her suitcase, walked to the street corner, and called the one taxi company she could find on her dying phone. 20 minutes later, she was checking into a Holiday Inn 2 miles away, where the desk clerk was kind enough to let her charge her phone, and the restaurant was still serving soup to a handful of other travelers with nowhere else to go. Chapter 5. The Silence. The hotel room was generic and beige, with a view of the parking lot and a heater that rattled when it cycled on. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing her navy dress with the pearl buttons, and tried to decide what to do next. She could change her flight and go home tomorrow, pretend this had never happened, call David in a few weeks and talk about the weather and his work, never mentioning that she had flown across the country for Christmas and been turned away at his door. She could call him now, apologize for showing up without proper notice, accept whatever crumbs of time he might offer during her visit. Or she could do something she had never done before in her life. Absolutely nothing. Margaret had spent 73 years accommodating other people's needs, smoothing over awkward moments, making excuses for bad behavior, being reasonable and understanding and appropriate. She had raised a son who learned to treat kindness as weakness and love as something to be managed around more important priorities. What would happen if she stopped? What would happen if she simply existed, quietly and without apology, and let other people figure out how to respond? She ordered room service and watched a Christmas movie on television. She took a long bath and called the front desk to extend her stay through New Year's. She plugged in her phone and watched it light up with messages. The first came at 11:47 p.m. David, Mom, did you leave something in our mailbox? She didn't respond.
David found a note. We need to talk. She turned off the phone. Chapter 6. The Recognition. 3 days passed in strange, peaceful silence. Margaret read books from the hotel lobby, took walks around the nearby shopping center, and ate quiet meals in the restaurant downstairs. She spoke to no one except hotel staff, and only when necessary. It was the first time in decades that she had existed purely for herself, without reference to anyone else's needs or expectations. On the morning of the fourth day, her phone rang continuously for 2 hours. David, 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 unknown number, David, Claire, unknown number. When she finally answered, it was the unknown number. Grandma? Emma's voice, small and confused and achingly familiar. Hello, sweetheart. Grandma, where are you? Daddy says you came to visit, but you left. Did we do something wrong? Margaret closed her eyes. No, baby. You didn't do anything wrong. Daddy's been really upset, and Mommy keeps saying things about family and obligations, and I don't understand what happened. Are you mad at us? I'm not mad at anyone, Emma. But you left. You came to see us, and then you left without saying hello. The simple confusion in her granddaughter's voice broke something open inside Margaret's chest. Through the innocence of a child, she could suddenly see the situation clearly. A grandmother who traveled far to see her family, then disappeared without explanation. From Emma's perspective, it made no sense at all. Emma, sometimes grown-ups make things more complicated than they need to be. I wanted to see you very much. I brought you a present. You did? The excitement was immediate and pure. What is it? Well, it was supposed to be a surprise, but maybe surprises aren't such a good idea anymore. A pause. Then Emma's voice again, quieter. Grandma? Are you sad? Yes, sweetheart. I am sad. Is it because of us? No. It's because I miss you, and sometimes missing someone hurts. I miss you too. Can you come back, please? I practiced a song for you. You did? Silent Night. I wanted to play it for you on Christmas, but Daddy said you couldn't come to dinner because of important people. But those people left, and it's not even Christmas anymore, and you still haven't come back. Important people who had left, while family remained absent. Emma, can you put your daddy on the phone? He's been crying, Emma whispered. He doesn't think I know, but I saw him. Grown-ups shouldn't cry, should they? Sometimes they should, sweetheart. Sometimes crying is the only honest thing to do. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. David's voice was hoarse when he came to the phone.
Mom? Hello, David.
We've been calling you for 3 days. Why didn't you answer?
I was thinking. About what? About strangers. About who gets to be family and who doesn't. About the difference between being loved and being tolerated. A long pause. Mom, about that night. David, do you remember when you were 8 years old and you broke Mrs. Henderson's window playing baseball? What does that have to do with... Do you remember what I told you to do? Another pause.
You said I had to go apologize, take responsibility. And you didn't want to, because you were embarrassed and scared. Mom, but I made you go anyway, because that's what people do when they've hurt someone. They acknowledge it. They take responsibility. They try to make it right. Silence on the other end of the line. You're 45 years old, David. Your daughter just asked me if grown-ups should cry because she's been watching you fall apart for 3 days. Your son has been asking everyone where Grandma went. And your wife has been discovering what it feels like to live with someone who's ashamed of the choices he's made. I'm not ashamed. You turned me away from your door. You called me a stranger. You chose your wife's comfort over your mother's dignity. And you chose your career over your family. If you're not ashamed of that, you should be. She heard him take a shaky breath. I didn't know you were really coming. The way you took it, I thought you understood. David, stop. Stop making excuses. I raised you better than this. You did. His voice broke slightly. You did, and I forgot. I got so caught up in impressing people who don't really matter that I lost sight of the people who do. Claire's been furious with me since she read your note. She says I'm an idiot if I think career success means anything when you treat your family like garbage. Margaret blinked in surprise. Claire said that? She's been crying too. She says she didn't realize who you were, what you meant. She thought you were some distant relative who just decided to show up. She didn't know you raised me alone. Didn't know about Dad dying. Didn't know about the sacrifices you made. She didn't know because I never told her. Margaret sat down heavily on the hotel bed. Why didn't you tell her, David? Because he was quiet for so long she thought he might have hung up. Because I wanted to be the kind of person who came from a different life, someone who didn't need anything from anyone, someone whose success was his own accomplishment. And instead, you became someone who throws away the people who helped make that success possible. Yes, the word was barely audible. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I can't even... Emma keeps asking why you won't come home, and I don't know what to tell her because I don't understand how I became the kind of person who would turn away his own mother. Margaret found herself crying for the first time since that night on his porch. Not from sadness now, but from relief. Her son was still there, underneath all of the professional ambition and social anxiety. The boy who had cried in her arms after his father's funeral was still there. David? Yes? Do you want me to come home? Yes, please. More than anything. Then come get me. Chapter 8. The Return. David arrived at the hotel 37 minutes later, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His hair was uncombed, his clothes wrinkled, and his eyes were red-rimmed. Margaret had never been happier to see him. He didn't say anything at first, just pulled her into a hug that lasted longer than any embrace they'd shared since he was a teenager. She felt how tightly he held her, as if she might disappear again if he let go. I'm sorry, he whispered against her hair. I'm so sorry, Mom. I know you are. I was scared, he admitted. Scared that if Claire knew too much about where I came from, she'd think less of me. Scared that if my colleagues met you, they'd see me differently. I was so worried about protecting the image I'd built that I forgot it was all built on what you gave me in the first place. Margaret pulled back to look at his face. David, I never needed you to be ashamed of me. I only needed you not to be ashamed of loving me. He nodded, tears streaming down his face. I know that now. Claire's been helping me understand what I did. She wants to meet you properly. She wants to apologize too. She doesn't need to apologize for protecting her home. She just didn't understand what she was protecting it from. They drove back to his house in comfortable quiet, the kind of silence that comes after difficult truths have been spoken. Margaret watched the familiar streets go by and realized she felt different than she had on that first taxi ride. Not hopeful in the same desperate way, but peaceful, certain. The front door opened before they reached the porch. Claire stood there, elegant even in jeans and a sweater. but her face was soft in a way Margaret had never seen before. Behind her, Emma and Jake bounced on their toes with barely contained excitement. "Mrs. Thornton," Claire said, stepping forward with her hand extended. "I'm Claire. I'm so glad to finally meet you properly." Margaret took her hand, surprised by the firmness of the grip and the directness of the gaze. "Thank you for having me in your home. It's your son's home, too, and your grandchildren's. That makes it your home as well, whenever you want to be here." Emma couldn't contain herself any longer. She launched herself at Margaret with the full force of an 8-year-old's affection, wrapping her arms around her grandmother's waist. "Grandma, I missed you so much. Are you going to stay for Christmas? It's not too late. We can still have Christmas." Jake, quieter but no less enthusiastic, took Margaret's hand and began pulling her toward the living room. "Grandma, come see the tree. We saved a spot for your presents." Margaret let herself be led inside, marveling at the transformation. The house felt warmer somehow, more welcoming. The carefully arranged furniture looked lived in rather than staged. Christmas music played softly from hidden speakers. "Mom," David said, appearing beside her with her suitcase, "I put your things in the guest room. If you want to stay, we'd like you to stay. For as long as you want." "I'd like that very much." Claire appeared with a cup of tea. "I hope this is all right. David told me you liked Earl Grey, but I wasn't sure if you took milk or sugar." "This is perfect, thank you." As Margaret settled into an armchair, one that had been turned to face the room rather than positioned for show, she realized something had fundamentally changed, not just in David's attitude, but in the very atmosphere of the house. The performance was over. The careful maintenance of appearances had given way to something more genuine. "Grandma," Emma said, climbing onto the arm of Margaret's chair, "will you hear my song now?" "I would love nothing more." As Emma ran to the piano and began the opening notes of Silent Night, Margaret caught David's eye. He was watching his daughter with an expression of wonder, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Claire settled on the couch nearby, and Jake climbed into her lap to listen to his sister play. The scene was so ordinary, so beautifully ordinary, that Margaret felt her throat tighten with emotion. This was what she had traveled for. Not the perfect Christmas dinner or the impressive house or the carefully orchestrated family performance. Just this, being present for a moment that mattered to people who mattered to her. When Emma finished, the silence that followed was full and warm. "That was beautiful, sweetheart. I practiced every day after Daddy told me you were coming. I wanted it to be perfect for you." "It was perfect." David cleared his throat. "Mom, there is something else. I called your landlord and arranged to have your apartment cleaned and maintained while you're here. And I want you to think about staying. Not just for Christmas. There's no reason for you to be alone anymore. Not when we want you here." Margaret looked around the room, at Claire's encouraging smile, at Emma beaming with pride, at Jake already half asleep in Claire's arms, at David watching her with the same hopeful expression he'd worn as a child asking for permission to hope. "I'd need my own space," she said carefully. "I wouldn't want to impose on your daily routine." "There's an apartment above the garage," Claire said quickly. "We've been using it for storage, but it has its own entrance, a little kitchen, a lovely view of the garden. We could fix it up, make it comfortable. Close enough to be part of things, far enough away to maintain independence," David added. "What do you think?" Margaret thought about her small apartment across the country, with its single-serving meals and evening silence and holidays spent alone. Then she looked at Emma, who was watching her with naked hope. "I think," she said slowly, "that sounds like home." Chapter 9. The New Christmas. They ended up celebrating Christmas 3 days late, which Emma declared was even more special because it's just ours. Claire cooked a feast that put Margaret's frozen dinners to shame, but she also asked for Margaret's recipes and listened carefully as she explained the techniques for making perfect gravy and her famous dinner rolls. David carved the turkey with the same concentration he brought to everything else, but he also kept glancing around the table as if memorizing the scene. Jake told knock-knock jokes between courses, and Emma insisted on performing 3 more piano pieces because Grandma's really here now. After dinner, they sat in the living room and opened presents. Margaret had brought gifts from her apartment, carefully chosen books for the children, a beautiful scarf for Claire, and for David, a photo album from his childhood that she'd been saving for the right moment. "I thought your children should see who your daddy used to be," she explained as David turned the pages slowly. Emma climbed onto his lap to peer at the pictures. "Daddy, you were so little." "Is that you playing baseball?" Jake asked, pointing to a photo of David in a Little League uniform. "Your grandmother came to every single game, even when she was working double shifts at the hospital. She'd bring dinner in a paper bag and eat it in the stands." Claire looked at Margaret with new understanding. "You were a nurse." 37 years. Pediatric ICU mostly. "I wanted to help children get better, the way I wanted someone to help David when his father was sick." "She saved people," David told his children. "Your grandmother saved people for a living." Emma looked at Margaret with wide eyes. "You're a hero, Grandma." "No, sweetheart. I was just a mother who learned that sometimes love means working very hard for people who need you." But as she said it, Margaret realized that maybe those two things weren't so different after all. Chapter 10. The Understanding.
Late that night, after the children were in bed and Claire had gone upstairs to make plans for renovating the garage apartment, Margaret and David sat in the quiet living room. The Christmas tree lights cast gentle shadows on the walls, and the house felt settled around them. "Mom," David said, "I need you to know something. What I did the other night, turning you away, it wasn't really about Claire or my career or any of the excuses I made." Margaret waited. "It was about fear. I was afraid that if people saw where I came from, they'd realize I didn't deserve where I ended up. I was afraid that if they knew how much I needed you, how much I owed you, they'd think less of my accomplishments." "David, no, let me finish. I was afraid that if anyone saw how much you loved me, they'd expect me to love you back the same way. And I was afraid I didn't know how to do that anymore. I was afraid I'd forgotten how to be your son and could only remember how to be successful." Margaret reached over and took his hand. "You never forgot, sweetheart. You just got scared of remembering. I hurt you. I hurt you badly, and I did it because I was more worried about impressing strangers than honoring the person who made everything possible for me. But you remembered in the end. That's what matters." David shook his head. "Claire reminded me. Your note reminded me. Emma asking why grown-ups cry reminded me. I didn't remember on my own. I needed other people to tell me I was losing the most important thing in my life." Margaret squeezed his hand. "Sometimes we all need reminders about what matters. The important thing is being willing to listen when they come." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the tree lights twinkle. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Were you lonely? All these years when I was so busy building my career and my life, were you lonely?" Margaret considered lying, giving him the comfortable answer that would ease his guilt, but they had moved beyond comfortable answers. "Yes," she said simply. "I was very lonely." David's face crumpled. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I let that happen." "David, look at me." She waited until his eyes met hers. "I chose to be lonely rather than demand attention I wasn't sure you wanted to give. That was my choice. But I don't have to make that choice anymore, do I?" "No, never again." "Then we're both learning something new. You're learning that success doesn't mean anything if you lose the people who helped you achieve it. And I'm learning that love doesn't mean suffering in silence when the people you love lose sight of you." David nodded slowly. "We're both learning that family isn't something you graduate from. It's something you choose every day." Exactly. Outside, snow began to fall. The first white Christmas Denver had seen in years. Through the window, Margaret could see it dusting the garden where her new apartment would look out on, settling on the swing set where her grandchildren played, covering the world in quiet peace. "David?" "Yes, Mom?"
I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you. Not because of your career or your house or your success. I'm proud of you because when you realized you'd made a mistake, you had the courage to fix it. Not everyone does." David leaned over and kissed her forehead, the way she used to kiss his when he was small and needed comfort. "I love you, Mom." "I should have said that more often. You can say it more often now." "I will. Every day. I'll hold you to that." They laughed together, and Margaret realized this was the Christmas she had really been hoping for all along. Not the perfect meal or the expensive presents or the picture-worthy family gathering, just this, sitting with her son in a peaceful house, knowing she belonged there, knowing she would still belong there tomorrow and the day after that. The note in the mailbox had done its work. It had reminded them all who they really were beneath the roles they played for the world. It had called them back to the simple, complicated, essential truth of family. That love is not a performance, but a practice, not an achievement, but a choice made new each day. As the snow continued to fall outside, Margaret Thornton sat in her son's living room and felt, for the first time in years, completely at home. Epilogue. The choice made new. 6 months later, Margaret was tending her small garden behind the garage apartment when she heard Emma's voice calling across the yard. "Grandma, phone." She walked inside to find David holding the cordless phone, grinning. "It's Mrs. Chen from down the street. She wants to know if you'll teach her granddaughter to play piano. Apparently word is getting around about your musical skills." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "I don't play piano. Emma does. She told Mrs. Chen you're the one who taught her to read music and helped her with the fingering for that Bach piece she's working on now." "Oh." Margaret accepted the phone. "I suppose I did help with that." As she made arrangements to meet with Mrs. Chen's granddaughter, Margaret caught David watching her with an expression she'd come to recognize, the look of a man still amazed to discover his mother was a whole person with talents and interests beyond being his mother. It had been a learning process for all of them. Margaret was teaching Claire to make her famous apple pie, and Claire was teaching Margaret to use the computer to video call her sister. David had started coming over every morning for coffee before work, not because Margaret needed anything, but because he wanted to begin each day by checking in with the person who mattered most. The children treated her apartment like an extension of their own home, which it was. Emma practiced piano there in the afternoons when she wanted quiet space, and Jake often did his homework at Margaret's kitchen table, where she could help him with math problems and he could tell her about his friends at school. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when David got caught up in work stress and forgot to call, when Claire felt overwhelmed by the sudden expansion of family obligations, when Margaret worried she was imposing despite all reassurances to the contrary. But they had learned something valuable from that night at the door. That family isn't a given, it's a choice that must be made consciously and repeatedly. They had also learned that love doesn't mean never having difficult conversations. When Margaret felt David pulling away into work mode, she said so. When Claire needed space for her own friendships and interests, she asked for it. When David felt guilty about past neglect and tried to overcompensate, Margaret gently redirected him toward balance rather than self-punishment. The note in the mailbox had become family legend. Emma, who had heard the story many times, declared it the most important letter ever written. Jake, more pragmatic, wanted to know why grown-ups made everything so complicated when they could just talk to each other. Sometimes, Margaret explained to him one afternoon as they worked on a puzzle together, people forget how to say what they really mean. They get scared that if they're honest about what they need, other people might not want to give it to them. But that's silly, Jake said, fitting two pieces together with satisfaction. If someone doesn't want to give you what you need, they're probably not very nice anyway. Out of the mouths of babes. Margaret had started volunteering at the local elementary school, helping children with reading difficulties. She discovered that her years of patient encouragement with David had given her a gift for seeing potential in struggling students. The principal asked if she'd consider making it a permanent position. "At your age?" David had asked, though not unkindly. "At my age, I finally have time to do work that feeds my soul instead of just paying my bills," she'd replied. Claire supported the idea enthusiastically. "It's wonderful to see you building something that's entirely yours," she said. "Not daughter, not mother, not grandmother, just Margaret." It was true. For the first time in decades, Margaret was discovering who she was when she wasn't defined entirely by her relationships to other people. She liked that person. She was curious and capable and had strong opinions about educational policy. She made friends with other volunteers and joined a book club and learned to use email to stay in touch with her sister more regularly. The funny thing was that becoming more herself made her a better mother and grandmother, not a more distant one. When you're not desperately trying to earn love through service, you have energy left over for genuine connection. One evening, in late spring, as Margaret was closing her apartment after a day spent reading with second graders, she found David sitting on her small porch with a cup of coffee. "Long day?" he asked. "Good day," she corrected, settling into the chair beside him. "There's a difference. Tell me about it." So she did. She told him about Marcus, who had finally stopped reversing his letters, and about Sophia, who had discovered she loved poetry, and about the new curriculum the district was implementing that she thought showed real promise. David listened with the same attention he gave to important business presentations. When she finished, he said, "I never really understood what you did when I was growing up. I knew you worked at the hospital, but I didn't really think about what that meant day to day. You were a child. Children don't usually think about their parents as separate people with their own lives. But I should have asked, later, when I was an adult. I should have been curious about who you were beyond being my mother." Margaret looked at him thoughtfully. "David, you can't undo the past, but you can choose to be curious now." "I am. I want to know everything. What you liked about nursing, what you hated about it, what you dreamed about when you were my age, what you still dream about now." "We have time for all of that," Margaret said gently. "We have years to learn about each other." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Emma and Jake play in the backyard while Claire tended her garden. The scene was so ordinary and so precious that Margaret felt her heart expand with gratitude. Her phone buzzed with a text message. She'd finally learned to use the smartphone Claire had given her for her birthday. From Emma. "Grandma, can you help me with my science project tomorrow? We're studying plants, and you know everything about gardens." Margaret showed David the message, and he grinned. "She's right, you know. You do know everything about gardens." "I know enough," Margaret corrected, typing back a response. "And I know how to find out what I don't know." That's the same thing in the end. Margaret considered this. It was true in a way. She'd spent so many years thinking she needed to have all the answers, to be completely self-sufficient, to never need anything from anyone. But the best parts of this new life came from admitting what she didn't know and asking for help learning it. "David," she said suddenly, "do you remember what you said to me that night on the phone when Emma called?" "Which part?" "You said you'd become someone who turns away his own mother, and you didn't understand how." David's face grew serious. "I remember. I've been thinking about that. I think I know how." He waited. "You became that person the same way I became someone who expected to be turned away. Slowly. one small choice at a time. One conversation where you chose impression over connection. One phone call where I chose not to ask for what I needed. One holiday where we both pretended everything was fine when it wasn't. David nodded slowly. And we became different people the same way. One choice at a time in the other direction. Exactly. The note in the mailbox wasn't magic. It was just one honest moment after years of dishonest ones. But honest moments build on each other, the way dishonest ones do. So we just have to keep choosing honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. As if to illustrate the point, Jake came running over with a scraped knee and tears in his eyes. Without thinking, both Margaret and David reached for him at the same time. "I've got him," David said automatically. "We both do," Margaret corrected gently. They cleaned the scrape together, David holding Jake steady while Margaret applied the bandage. Jake, pragmatic as always, stopped crying as soon as he realized the injury wasn't serious. "Thanks, Daddy. Thanks, Grandma," he said, and ran back to his game. "See?" Margaret said to David. "Some things are better when you don't have to do them alone." As summer approached, the family fell into rhythms that felt both new and timeless. Sunday dinners where everyone contributed something to the meal, evening walks around the neighborhood where Margaret pointed out plants and birds while the children peppered her with questions. Quiet mornings when David stopped by for coffee and they talked about everything and nothing. Margaret had lived long enough to know that these peaceful times wouldn't last forever. There would be challenges ahead, aging, illness, the inevitable difficulties that come with any close relationship. But she also knew something she hadn't understood during all those lonely years, that facing challenges together was not a burden but a gift. The woman who had stood on David's porch 6 months ago, holding her suitcase and her wounded dignity, had been waiting for someone to invite her into love. The woman she was now understood that love was not something you waited to receive, but something you practiced every day, with yourself and with others. She had taught her son this lesson, finally, but more importantly, she had learned it herself. On a warm evening in June, exactly 6 months after that snowy Christmas night, Margaret sat in her garden reading while Emma practiced piano in the main house. The music drifted across the yard, not Silent Night this time, but a Bach invention that required all of Emma's concentration and skill. David appeared with 2 glasses of iced tea, settling into the chair beside hers without invitation. This had become their routine, ending each day with a few minutes together, saying nothing that needed to be said, but everything that wanted to be said. "Good day?" he asked, handing her a glass. "Very good. You?" "The same." They listened to Emma's piano for a while, occasionally commenting when she navigated a particularly difficult passage successfully. "Mom," David said eventually, "I have something to tell you." Margaret looked at him with mild concern. "What is it?" "Claire is pregnant." Margaret's face lit up with joy. "Oh, David, that's wonderful! How is she feeling?" "Good. Nervous, but good. We wanted to tell you first before we tell the kids." He paused. "We were wondering if you'd like to help choose a name." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. To be included in such an intimate family decision, to have her opinion valued and sought, it was more than she had dared hoped for. "I would be honored," she said. "Claire was hoping you might share some stories about your own pregnancy, what it was like having me. She says she wants to learn from someone who did it with grace." "I don't know about grace. I was terrified most of the time." "But you did it. You raised a good man, even if it took him a while to remember how to act like one."
Margaret reached over and squeezed his hand. "We all lose our way sometimes, David. The important thing is finding our way back." As if summoned by their words, Emma's piano practice ended and the children came spilling out into the garden, full of energy and questions about dinner and tomorrow's plans and whether Grandma wanted to see the fort they'd built in the big oak tree. Margaret looked around at this loud, chaotic, beautiful family and marveled at how different her life looked now from 6 months ago. Not because circumstances had changed, though they had, but because she had finally learned the difference between being included and belonging. Being included was about other people making space for you out of obligation or guilt. Belonging was about all of you choosing to make space for each other out of love. The note in the mailbox had reminded them all of a simple truth, that family is not about blood or law or social expectation. It's about choosing to see each other clearly, to love each other honestly, and to show up for each other consistently, even when it's inconvenient. As the evening settled around them and Claire called everyone in for dinner, Margaret gathered her book and her iced tea and walked toward the house where warm light spilled from every window. Behind her, the garden grew quietly in the gathering dusk, each plant rooted deep and reaching toward the light. She was home. Finally, completely, unquestionably home. And tomorrow, she would choose to be home again.